Thank you so much for being with us here today. And I was wondering, though, if just to kick things off, you could give me a little bit of an overview of who the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association is and what you stand for, why you became a thing in the first place.
Sure. Thanks for that introduction. Yes, so I'm chairman of the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association. The association has been around since 2004. It was formed with the merger of the Canadian Fuel Cell Association and Hydrogen Canada. So we are a national nonprofit industry association that represents the hydrogen and fuel cell industry in Canada and around the world. So we have about 50 members, and our membership is comprised of car companies, tier one industry suppliers to the automotive industry, government labs, some academic members, universities. We've got a number of consultants, as well as stack suppliers such as Ballard and Hydrogenics. And we pretty much cover the whole area, and then we've got testing and certification and test equipment as well. So we cover the whole gambit in Canada.
Great. So it really sounds like you guys have a lot of members, a lot of people that are going for a lot of different things. What is it that brings you guys all together, other than, of course, hydrogen? But do you guys have a specific raison d'etre or a mandate, or what is it that you guys are really trying to push?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, like most industry associations, our goal is to promote commercialization of the industry and help adoption of the technology in this case. I mean, we're a little different than some industry associations because our industry is in a very early stage. So we support research. We support research initiatives in universities and at the National Research Council of Canada. And then we're working with our customers to promote the industry and commercialize it. And for example, one of the activities that the association does is organize trade missions. And we have a booth just over there at E59, and we've got 6 Canadian companies represented in the booth. So we're sponsoring that. We raise money for it so it can subsidize our members to come to events like this.
All right, fantastic. So you have many companies. You say that we do a lot of research as well. So Canada, in many ways, is actually quite a big player for you, or for hydrogen and as well for fuel cells. Why is that? I mean, Canada has a ton of other resources. We have a lot of green energy in the form of hydroelectricity. So how did we end up on the hydrogen and fuel cell scene?
Sure, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, for a country that's just used to cutting down trees and shipping them off, we really got our start in the hydrogen fuel cell business when a guy named Jeffrey Ballard was running a battery company. And in the 1980s, he got a contract from the government of Canada to develop and test fuel cells, to demonstrate fuel cells. And that was really the start of the industry in Canada. And we all know, I think most of us know Ballard's history, so they're now probably the world's largest supplier of fuel cells, and they're probably the most advanced on a commercial basis. And over the years, many other companies have spun out of Ballard, new startups, from former Ballard employees, and so it's really grown a cluster of fuel cell companies in the West Coast. And to support that, a number of the universities, University of Victoria, Simon Fraser, and UBC have all started fuel cell programs to support the industry. And then in Eastern Canada, Hydrogenics started independently back in the early 1990s, making test equipment, building fuel cells and electrolyzers, and they too are an industry leader. So we've basically got coast-to-coast fuel cell clusters that have developed, over the last 40 years.
Okay, fantastic. So we have that development. Where are we now? What's Canada doing today, and what is the association doing in terms of maybe new infrastructure or new policies type things?
Sure. So I'll approach that in 2 ways. But so Canada, we're quite advanced in the commercialization of the technology, of hydrogen and fuel cell technologies. But we tend to export our technology overseas. So, we partner with car companies in Asia, in China, Japan, so forth. We do a lot of partnering in Europe as well. We're a little slower on the adoption side. So there's certainly jurisdictions that are doing more to bring the benefits of hydrogen and fuel cell into their societies. We tend to export it, but it's good for economic development from a Canadian perspective. And then to carry on with that, what's going on, and specifically what's happening. So we are now seeing legislation that is promoting hydrogen fuel cells within some of the provinces in Canada. So we're not yet doing this at the federal level, but certain provinces such as Quebec and British Columbia are introducing zero emission mandates for the car companies. And in response to that, we're in those provinces, hydrogen infrastructure is being installed. And so we have raised money from our provincial government, and with some from the federal as well, but mostly it's a provincial initiative, to put in a cluster of 6 hydrogen fueling stations in the Vancouver area as well as Victoria. And then there's stations going in Quebec as well to support their fuel cell vehicle fleet.
Fantastic. So for the 6 stations that are going in Vancouver, are they already built, or when will we expect to see those coming up?
Yeah, sure. So the first station was put in by a company called H-Tech. That's a Canadian company that's part of our association, and in conjunction with Shell. So it's at a Shell station. The first station's it was opened last June, and that's right in Vancouver. The second station of that 6 is going in, and it will be completed in the next 2 months, and that's in Burnaby, which is the first suburb to the east of Vancouver. And then there's a plan. The other ones have the sites have been identified. The funding is being made available, and there will be 5 more stations in Vancouver and 1 in Victoria.
Okay, thank you. So we have some fueling stations going in. Who's sort of using those at the moment? I know that Canada has a little bit of a challenge actually importing and getting those hydrogen fuel cell cars. I recently read a stat that 64% of Canadians want to get their next car as an electric vehicle, which is fantastic, but we're not totally seeing those numbers coming out at this point. Can you comment a little bit on that sort of situation?
Yeah. Okay, so you've just raised a topic that's very dear to our hearts, and that's something we're really working at. Because the last thing we want to do as an association is sponsor a number of fueling stations, but not have any cars. So what we're doing now is we've got the stations underway. You need the stations first, obviously, but now we're lobbying to get fleets of hydrogen vehicles in the Vancouver area. So Hyundai has committed to putting a number of their new Nexos in Vancouver. We probably have about 8 of their old the hydrogen Tucsons, the fuel cell Tucsons, but those are low pressure, so they're a slightly older technology. But we're going to have a fleet of probably 12 Hyundai Nexos, and I've been trying to get one personally, but without too much success. Hyundai is going to put them in fleets. Actually, is the plan. So they've already put 2 in a car sharing fleet called Mondo, and that's going to give them very broad usage through people in the city. So people who may not be going out to buy an electric vehicle will have the opportunity to drive one of these hydrogen fuel cell vehicles in a fleet. And then if I can just say, we're also working with Toyota to put Mirais in Vancouver. So again, those are probably going to go into fleet applications, possibly with the province. And we expect to have, fingers crossed, about 50 vehicles by the end of the year in the Vancouver area.
Oh, that's fantastic. I was just going to say that that's having them in a car share program is a really good idea for just public exposure. A lot of people hear hydrogen fuel cell and have no idea what the technology really is and feel like there might be like safety concerns or it's not as fun to drive or all these things. They're a hoot. You should check out driving them. You can drive them just out there with any valid driver's license. So I think that's really great. And as well, I had read that Quebec is thinking or is trying to be selling the Toyota as well.
Yes, sure. So as I said, Quebec is one of the provinces that's put in a zero emission mandate. So they're now putting in 2 hydrogen fueling stations. Hydrogenics is putting in 1, and H-Tech is putting in another. And they're going to have a mobile refueler in Quebec as well. And yeah, they're expecting to get 50 cars from Toyota. So they will have 50 Mirais. And those are going to the province as fleet vehicles. Again, so those won't be in the general public consumption, but they'll be in a fleet with the province.
So it might still take us a little bit of time before the average person, if I may call you so, can actually buy their own or lease their own hydrogen fuel cell car. But at least we're going to start getting a use for those fueling stations that have been put into Vancouver as well. So that's excellent. That's really good progress to see in Canada. So even within the mobility sector, but outside of the cars, what sort of projects are you looking forward to, or next steps for the Canadian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association?
Well, a couple of things we're watching is the application for what's called Hydrail, and that's hydrogen fuel cell powered train transport. So the province of Ontario's their transit authority called Metrolinx that runs the commuter train system did a 1-year study last year on basically the feasibility of a Hydrail system for running trains based on hydrogen, and this would be their whole commuter network. So a couple of the key findings from their report was that it is feasible. So, and this would be to replace the overhead power lines with a hydrogen system. Gives them a lot more rail flexibility for going on different tracks and different directions without having to build the whole overhead power line concept. And then not only is it feasible, it's also cost comparative to the existing technology. So its life cycle costing would be equivalent, and but they did observe that it's never been done before to the large extent for a whole network. I mean, we know there's a fuel cell electric train here in Germany that Alstom has put in with hydrogenics, but they have nowhere in the world yet has done a hydrogen rail system like they're studying in Toronto. So they think that in the next few years they'll take some next steps, and there's a number of recommendations in that report.
Interesting. I mean, it would be such an exciting thing to have your entire network be running off the hydrogen fuel cell technology, but also a massive initial investment, and being a pioneer is both really exciting, but I'm sure it's also a little bit intimidating to take on such a huge project.
Yeah, for sure. But you know, I think with the right amount of funding, I think government funding, I think that's a very feasible project, and yeah, it's an application we're actually quite excited about.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. So you mentioned the government funding. Are you getting that support at the provincial or the federal level at the moment in Canada?
So definitely, it's happening in some provinces at the provincial level. What we're seeing federal programs that aren't necessarily targeted directly to fuel cells, but they're targeted to meeting our CO2 climate targets. So some of those funds are getting split off and being able to take advantage of by members of our association and by our industry.
Okay, so not necessarily a direct funding to the hydrogen, but by putting in these green initiatives,
exactly.
You get people more likely to want to invest in that sort of technology.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic.
And actually, I will just add that Canada is a very good place to do R&D because we have very good R&D subsidies. We have great tax credits for research and development to the tune of pretty much 50 cents on the dollar. So I think that's another reason that Canadian companies are able to invest in R&D because they're getting tax credits for that. And my company has certainly benefited from those programs at the federal level.
Okay, great. So yeah, I mean, if you have the incentive to do it, then why not, really?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so we are wrapping it up a little bit here. So I was just wondering if you have any final thoughts on things that you're particularly excited about, or a final take-home message that you might want to give before we have time for just one or two quick questions if anyone has anything.
Okay, I'll just throw out one more project that we're watching, and that was that Hydrogenics was recently awarded a 20-megawatt electrolyzer project in conjunction with Air Liquide, and that's going to go into Quebec for its industrial gas hydrogen production. So this is apparently going to supplement. Air Liquide already has an existing SMR, steam methane reforming hydrogen production, and instead of expanding that, they've found that they can do electrolysis at an equivalent rate. And the electricity they're going to use to create the hydrogen is clean. It's from hydroelectric and low cost. So we're going to have clean supply of hydroelectricity, and it's going to replace natural gas reformed hydrogen. So that in the industrial gas market. So that's actually a really exciting project.
Yeah, it sounds like a very exciting time for the association.
Yeah.
On a somewhat less exciting but still certainly important thing, you guys actually have another event coming up just in May. Is that right?
Oh, I'm so glad you reminded me of that. Yes, so we're co-sponsoring a conference in Vancouver on May 22nd and 23rd, and this is a hydrogen and fuel cell conference. It's being sponsored. It's every 2 years. We have what we call the HFC, conference, and we've got a co-sponsor with FCEL, the group that does the FCEL conferences in Stuttgart. So we're working with Peter Sauber's group, and we've got a conference scheduled in May in Vancouver, and you're all welcome to attend.
Also, May in Vancouver is an excellent time. It's actually nice weather and less likely to be raining, so
Yes.
head to Vancouver for that conference there. Does anyone have any questions at this point for Mr. Bailey? All right, all right. I'll come down. If you wouldn't mind just giving your name.
Yeah, my name is Oscar Martinez. Last week we read a report that a team in Canada was having some progress in saltwater electrolysis. Would you have maybe additional information on this new process, or?
Yeah, no, sorry. I don't. I didn't read that, so I'm not sure who the key players in that project would be. So, but if you come see me afterward, we could look it up, and I could probably at least tell you who you could talk to. Okay.
All right, and if anyone else wants to go visit Mr. Bailey as well, then his booth is D60, but the rest of the Canadian Association is going to be at E59, so head on over that way. So at this point, I'd just like to give you a big thank you so much for that very informative chat, and I hope you continue to enjoy your time at the fair.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.